Disclaimer, I have not seen a substantial amount of films this year. I actually only saw 22 so far, which is more than I saw last year, but still not that much. I wasn't focused on seeing every movie that came out this year because I don't consider myself a film reviewer, quote unquote, for lack of a better term. I don't see this as a best of the year list because I didn't see enough movies to really justify that. It's more of just me talking about the stuff I did see. If you want to recommend films for me to see, leave them in the comments. Without further ado, let's start talking about the films. After the original Diary of a Wimpy Kid trilogy of films and then the horrible long haul reboot film, I guess they wanted to reboot Diary of a Wimpy Kid yet again with an animated film this time around. This is the second film adaptation of the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, except this one was whittled down to the extremely short runtime of 50 minutes. Therefore, it feels like a Diary of a Wimpy Kid greatest hits film, going through popular beats from the first book extremely fast with no breathe room. This was really forgettable, and I'm still baffled that my Diary of a Wimpy Kid long haul video from way back is the most popular video on my channel.
Roderick, can you explain what you're doing in this photo?
That's not me.
That's not you?
Nope.
Okay. How about these?
There's definitely an audience for this movie. I'm just not it, I guess. I found this movie insanely boring, actually. The only MonsterVerse movie that I actually like is Peter Jackson's King Kong. Technically, that's not even part of this universe, but at least that movie had really fun, campy characters that propelled the story, and it had actual consequences and stakes, and, Peter Jackson had his own style to the film. Godzilla vs. Kong had none of that. Spoilers for a movie that came out almost a full year ago, but neither Kong nor Godzilla even wins the fight. Nobody dies. The film ends exactly how it began, as if nothing happened. The tagline of this movie is "One will fall," which is complete bullshit. They're lying to you. Nobody falls. Everyone gets out of this movie okay. At least with the Peter Jackson Kong, people actually died and there was consequences for things. I don't know. I really didn't like Godzilla vs. Kong. It felt like nothing really happened in a weird way. Okay, before people start killing me for putting this so low on the list, I'm really happy for Zack Snyder being able to make this movie. The studio did him really dirty, and I'm disgusted with how they handled the tragedy in Zack Snyder's life by using Joss Whedon to destroy his vision. That being said, I still thought this 4-hour cut was a mess, even if I am happy for Zack Snyder. People seem to think that Zack Snyder made a really deep, artistic superhero film that broke a lot of boundaries, but I don't see that at all. It had basically the same plot as any other superhero team-up movie, where the generic bad guy wants to take over the world and has to unite a bunch of powerful objects in order to do so. The film feels really disjointed because it has to spend time to introduce Flash and Cyborg and Aquaman for the first time and balance that with characters we already know, like Batman and Wonder Woman. Even Ben Affleck's Batman still doesn't have a standalone movie to this day, so we don't even really know that much about him yet. It often feels like several movies being crammed into one film, which is why they should have made standalone films for all these characters before jumping right into a team-up movie. Also, the epilogue of this movie with Martian Manhunter and Jared Leto felt so tacked on, and it really didn't work for me. It made no sense. This is certainly better than the Joss Whedon cut, because really anything could be better than that cut of the film, but to me it was still pretty mediocre and didn't really do anything new or special. It just felt like another superhero team-up movie with the same story. I'm happy that this was made because I think it teaches studios a lesson about not interfering with the director's vision, but that doesn't mean I like the movie itself, even if it is a victory for directors' creative visions. Black Widow, I believe, was the first MCU film of 2021, the first theatrical experience for the MCU since, I think, Spider-Man Far From Home, I believe, which was in 2019. This wasn't a good start to the MCU in 2021. This movie felt super unnecessary to me. There's some interesting stuff, especially with the opening sequence and Florence Pugh's character, but the rest of it felt really bland to me. There's some good themes about broken family and abandonment from your, parents or guardians, but they don't feel well realized to me. They don't feel well executed. Natasha's step-parents, the Red Guardian, and her stepmother don't really do anything to redeem themselves in this movie. They're pretty horrible people. But by the end, they're supposed to be seen as redeemed heroes who are teaming up with the good guys, and that is never earned, and it really bothers me. The main villain, who looks kind of like Harvey Weinstein, is super generic, and the whole film itself is super bland. It felt like something Marvel would have made earlier in the MCU, in like Phase 1, but for some reason it was made now, even though it was backtracking on the timeline, and I just don't understand why this movie is even a thing. It kind of felt like Solo, a Star Wars story to me. It was just kind of there. Space Jam 2. For some reason we have a Space Jam sequel now, after all these years. The first movie isn't the greatest, but to me it was able to have really entertaining human characters to balance out the Looney Tunes. This sequel doesn't have that. All the humans kinda suck. There's no Wayne Knight or Bill Murray, it's just Don Cheadle monologuing a lot. I honestly forgot most of the movie, but I remember the Warner Bros. References being pretty cool. Just didn't have the same 90s charm as the original. You know, the original movie was very much a product of its time, and they couldn't really replicate that. Now, this is a super unpopular opinion, and I'm sure this video will be flooded with dislikes. This movie looked fantastic. You know, the visuals in this movie are breathtaking. It has a lot of exciting sequences, it was acted really well, but I did not give a crap about any of the characters. Timothée Chalamet plays an extremely boring, typical lead hero who is like the chosen one, and the story felt very shallow to me. Rebecca Ferguson constantly speaks in a whispering voice, which also annoyed the crap out of me the whole film. The movie felt very style over substance to me, which is weird because I've liked almost everything Denis Villeneuve has made. Maybe I need to watch it again, maybe there's something I missed about this film, but I don't really feel the need to. Like, I don't have a desire to revisit this film. And I think if I do revisit it, I'll probably feel the same way, unfortunately. Alright guys, I have a problem. I remember really enjoying this movie when I first saw it, but for some reason now I can hardly remember anything about it. Like, I remember a few things, but not much. It felt like a dream I had, like when you have a dream and you remember certain images, but no matter how hard you try, you can't remember any specifics about it. I should probably rewatch it. I put it on here anyway because I have seen it, but it's almost like it's been erased from my memory. It's really weird. I know this section of the video is kind of a cop-out. Whoops. Nobody. This was basically John Wick with a more interesting lead character. Instead of Keanu Reeves going on a revenge rampage for his dog, Bob Odenkirk plays a middle-aged man who used to be a John Wick-like assassin, and now he's in a very conventional, humdrum family life. And through a bunch of circumstances, he has to return to being John Wick again, basically, back to his former assassin self. The movie starts off fairly realistic and grounded, and there's a fantastic sequence on a bus where Odenkirk gets his ass kicked. For whatever reason, after that scene, Odenkirk becomes completely invincible, and the movie takes a complete tonal shift into full absurdity. It was still entertaining, but not nearly as good as the first act of the film. Bob Odenkirk is an incredible actor, and he carries the entire movie on his shoulders. If he wasn't playing the lead character, this movie would probably suck. Luca was fine. It felt like a very middle-of-the-road, inconsequential animated film to me, which was kind of disappointing given Pixar's incredible track record. It felt very safe and similar to other films that I had seen already. One of the threads I wanted to see explored was Sacha Baron Cohen's character. He kind of introduces a plot thread that never really gets followed up on, but I really wanted to see where that could have gone if it was explored more.
But eventually everyone runs out of time.
I love M. Night Shyamalan. Even if he doesn't always make the best movie in the world, it's still interesting and original. Old has a lot of good things. It has a lot of things that I really like, but it also has a lot of things that didn't work for me. The characters and the acting is all terrific, and the arc that the parents go through by the end of the film is really well realized. Shyamalan knows what he's doing behind the camera. My biggest issues with the movie have to do with the climax and the ending. The twist was extremely predictable, and I question whether it was even supposed to be a twist, because it was so obvious from, like, really early on in the movie. There's several points where the movie could have ended, but it kind of just kept going, and Shyamalan keeps making long scenes where characters explain what's going on in case the audience doesn't get it. It felt like the film could have been great if the script was given a few more drafts. I will support everything M. Night Shyamalan makes, though, and just because he made a movie that I have problems with doesn't mean I'm gonna shit on the guy like a little bitch and declare that he shouldn't make any more films. Encanto was a really cool Disney movie. The best thing about it is that for the most part it doesn't follow typical Disney cliches. There's actually quite a bit of morally gray characters in this movie, which I thought was really interesting. The characters actually have intriguing layers to peel back and flaws. The villain especially is interesting in that they have a good heart and want the best for everyone, but they go about that in all the wrong ways. I think Maribel, I think that's how you say her name, is one of the best Disney princesses, if that's what we want to call them, because she's a lot more relatable. She's not like a flawless human being like Jasmine or Cinderella. The music is also really good. I heard the movie didn't do that well at the box office, and that could have to do with COVID, but I feel like a factor in that is the fact that the movie isn't as conventional or accessible for young kids as something like Frozen or Moana is. It actually felt like they tried to do something mature here, and I really appreciate that. The ending felt like it went on a bit too long for me, and I wasn't crazy about the way everything wrapped up, but without counting Pixar, I think this is one of Disney's better movies in the last 10 years. Not quite as good as Zootopia or Tangled, but it's up there. Shang-Chi. This is a really good MCU movie, definitely one of the better ones. The characters are really good, there's a lot of creativity and humor, but the big standout here is the action sequences. It's some of the best action I've ever seen in a superhero movie. The bus sequence and the sequence on the side of the building, for example, are insanely good. The story itself isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's still really interesting. It had a very similar story to Black Widow, actually, and follows a lot of those story beats in terms of family and family strain. I'm not sure if that was a coincidence or if it was intentional, but this movie does everything Black Widow tried to do and does it way better. My issues in the movie kind of involve the climax. It definitely becomes a sort of typical big CGI Marvel extravaganza, and that didn't always work for me. I felt like the ending should have had more consequences and weight to it as well, rather than everything being really happy. It's one of the better MCU movies, though. It's just really well made and really entertaining. This movie got a lot of hate for some reason, and I fail to understand why. A lot of people talked about how it's just nostalgia bait and fan service, but I didn't get that impression at all with this film. Ghostbusters 2016, on the other hand, did give me that impression by following the original film beat for beat without doing anything new or even funny. This new film has a very different plot with very different characters. It has a slightly more serious tone than the other Ghostbusters films, and I know a lot of people didn't like that, but it's still a comedy for the most part, and the humor really hits. There were several sequences where I was laughing pretty heavily. To me, this film also has the most heart of the Ghostbusters films, following a very personal and emotional story about absent parents, strained families, and loss. My main issue with the movie was Finn Wolfhard's character. I didn't like him at all, and there was way too much time dedicated to his bland teen romance subplot, but that's about it for me in terms of problems. I feel like most people saw a completely different movie than I did. I was actually stunned by how different and original this story was. Stowaway. This was a Netflix space movie that completely fell under the radar. It has a really unconventional plot in which 3 astronauts are going to Mars, but there's an unexpected 4th person on the ship who ended up there by accident. The ship doesn't have enough resources for 4 people, so the whole movie involves 4 astronauts trying to figure out how to deal with this issue. There's an insane amount of tension in this movie. I felt uncomfortable watching it at many points. I remember feeling really emotional by the time the movie ended. The acting from everyone is great, but I think the star here is Anna Kendrick. She's fantastic in this movie. The movie is especially different in that it doesn't have a villain. The characters don't necessarily go through big arcs and transformations. It's just four good people trying to figure out how to best handle a horrible situation. And a lot of the time, that's just how real life works, you know? Like, people don't always go through huge arcs when they're going through something. Like, sometimes people are just good, and they're trying to figure out how to do the right thing. That's all I'm gonna say, because I think you should just go watch it. It's a mesmerizing and extremely overlooked and underrated film. It's a really good space movie. It really did the job for me. I'm counting this movie as 2021 because I don't think it got a release to the public until 2021. Destroy me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. I'm sorry, but here it is in the list. I don't really have anything new to say about this movie. Pretty much everyone has said everything there is to be said, and I would just be really repeating myself. You know, Anthony Hopkins is fantastic. The movie is really disorienting and is edited to make you feel like you have dementia. It's kind of like a dementia simulator, I guess. It's just really well done. It's a very stressful movie, and I found it really effective. I felt like A Quiet Place 2 did pretty much everything it needed to do to improve on the first film. One of the things I really like is that the characters are able to access several areas where they can openly speak to each other without having to sign language all the time, like the first movie. There's considerably more dialogue in this one than in the first one, and I think it's for the better. It makes the characters a lot more interesting. The world is expanded quite a bit, and we get answers to some questions from the first film, but it wisely keeps a lot of the questions unanswered as well. There's still a good amount of mystery and ambiguity. The opening flashback sequence is also thrilling. This movie isn't high art, it's not groundbreaking, it's not deep or metaphorical, but it's a really cool concept that John Krasinski executes really well. It's also a love letter to John Krasinski's family and his kids, and I think that theme definitely shines through in this film.
So that's it? What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
After the huge disappointment of the 2016 Suicide Squad, James Gunn fully revitalized it. I was looking forward to this movie because I like James Gunn, but it exceeded my expectations. I'm not going to spoil it in case you haven't seen it, but James Gunn was able to establish extreme stakes very early on and a lot of suspense. I complain about lack of consequences in other superhero movies a lot, and it kind of feels like James Gunn made a movie specifically to address my complaints with superhero movies. It's also rated R and doesn't hold back on the dark humor, which was a huge plus. The humor is really morbid and may actually not work for certain people, but if you have a dark sense of humor, this movie really works. I cared more about the characters in this film than I usually do in superhero movies because James Gunn develops them extremely well.
Commonwealth! Yes! Commonwealth!
I never talk about documentaries, but this one was so good that I wanted to touch on it. The Beatles are my favorite band. There's no question. I think they are easily the greatest band ever. What Peter Jackson did here was kind of a miracle. He was able to take 60 hours of unseen footage and turn it into this short miniseries, showing a more well-rounded look on the Beatles as they were on a course to breaking up. Although it was already obvious, this movie shows even further that Yoko Ono wasn't the cause of the band's breakup. All she did was offer John Lennon, a different life after the Beatles, and this movie shows that Yoko was not the culprit here at all. The documentary crew captured so many intimate, emotional moments between the four that have never been seen, and this is from over 50 years ago. The film also goes through the final concert of the Beatles ever, in which they illegally play on the top of a building. It shows the cops as they're attempting to break up the concert, and there's a lot of suspense that comes from that. It ends up feeling kind of like a thriller in the last part, even though you're watching real events unfold. I was hooked on this miniseries. Peter Jackson did some incredible work here. Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors just in general. With Last Night in Soho, he tackles a totally different genre than his usual stuff, and he does it really well. It's a horror movie, but it's also a horror movie about real issues and human darkness. This one specifically focuses on sexism, male perversion, and what it's like to be a woman in the big city art world. Not just in the 60s, but also in modern day, it's constantly showcased that these issues haven't been solved. There's a lot of twists and turns in this movie I didn't predict, and the acting from Thomasin McKenzie is extremely good. Anya Taylor-Joy has been showcased in most of the marketing, and she's a great actress, but she's a small part compared to Thomasin McKenzie. This is Thomasin's movie, and I think Oscar consideration would be completely earned on her part. My only issue is that some of the horror can feel repetitive and kind of cheap later on in the movie, if I'm being completely honest. A lot of it involves hallucinations and hauntings. Some of it really works, and some of it just didn't hit the mark for me. This is definitely my least favorite Edgar Wright film, but that doesn't mean much, because he's made like 5 masterpieces before this. It's like comparing Dr. Strangelove to The Shining. You know, The Shining is the Kubrick film you prefer, but Dr. Strangelove is still pretty great, and it's a completely different film, so it's not even really comparable. This is probably the best Spielberg movie since Minority Report. This was an excellent musical, and this is coming from someone who knew nothing about the original play. I actually didn't know that the play was a 1950s reimagination of Romeo and Juliet, so I went into this completely blind. So this is like a remake of an adaptation of a retelling of a play from the late 1500s. It's kind of insane how much staying power this story has. The cast is all excellent, and there's a lot of twists on the Romeo and Juliet story to make West Side Story feel like its own creative spin. Just like the original story, it has a lot to say about how love defies logic, and oftentimes it can be harmful and even selfish. This version of the story has a racial element to it as well that I thought was handled very well. This is, my first time experiencing West Side Story, so I really liked it.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
Spider-Man No Way Home. Before I start this segment, I want to let everyone know that I won't be talking spoilers. I'll be talking only about things revealed in the trailers. You're safe with me as long as you've seen the trailers. I thought this movie was great. It did pretty much everything it needed to do. I'm a huge fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, specifically the first 2, although I have a lot of nostalgia for 3. They're some of my favorite movies of all time, and I've wanted Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 for a long time, pretty much ever since I saw Spider-Man 3. So I went into this movie hoping the Tom Holland MCU elements of the film would be good, but mostly just looking forward to seeing how Sam Raimi's world would be utilized, because I just freaking love those movies so much. I'm not a fan of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and I thought the first 2 Tom Holland Spider-Man movies were enjoyable, although I did have a lot of issues with both of those movies. Namely the fact that Tom Holland was kind of a spoiled, extremely handsome kid who got everything handed to him, and didn't have very much hardship to deal with really at all. To me, that misses out on a lot of the things that I think make Spider-Man Spider-Man. Tom Holland felt more like an Iron Man Jr. to me than Peter Parker. The best part about No Way Home isn't the references to the other films, it's the fact that they finally put Tom Holland's Peter Parker through genuine hardship and consequences. This character is put through his biggest challenge yet, which you see a lot of the time when new movies come out. It's like, this is the biggest challenge yet, but this movie truly is the hardest thing Tom Holland has had to deal with. This is the first time I feel like Tom Holland has played the character of Spider-Man, rather than just a dude doing a solid Spider-Man impression. The Sam Raimi references are also great, of course. Alfred Molina as Doc Ock and Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin brought actual tears to my eyes. I never thought I'd see these characters again, and they're handled extremely well. I was so pleased with how they were handled. I was really concerned about how Amazing Spider-Man would be utilized because I'm not a fan of those films, but for the most part, they utilized the Amazing Spider-Man world surprisingly well, especially Electro. He was made 1,000,000 times better, and Jamie Foxx does a great job. I didn't really care that much about the Lizard in this movie, though. He had a few good moments, but overall I still found him pretty bland. I would have preferred Dylan Baker as the Lizard easily from the Raimi films. I also wasn't a huge fan of how they handled Sandman in this movie. I felt like his emotions and allegiances changed around way too much without any development for that, and there's something about the character visually that didn't work for me personally. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about with the visuals, probably. It may have been completely out of the filmmaker's control when they made the movie, but it still took me out of it. Lizard and Sandman both had really good moments, though, so it's not even a huge deal for me. I've talked about this movie for too long already. I could keep going for a while. There's nitpicks that I have with things, but it's a movie that made me really happy. I don't usually put superhero movies this high on my lists, so this is saying something. Spider-Man No Way Home, I mean, you already know this, but this is a really special film, honestly. This was my favorite movie of 2021, which I didn't expect to be saying. Apparently it's really controversial, which makes sense given the subject matter of the movie, but this movie stressed me out so much that it was hard for me to watch at several points, even though this is technically considered a comedy. The end of the movie sent me into tears. I had trouble sleeping, and I can't remember the last time I was this horrified by a film. I'm gonna avoid getting into specifics because this is certainly a political film and a satire on our current world, and I'd rather not be murdered for talking about politics. But if this is a preachy political film, it's an excellent one. Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence in particular are both Oscar-worthy, and I'm sure they will be nominated, and deservedly so. In fact, the whole movie will be up for a ton of awards, and it's deserved. I will be here for it. Leo, in particular, is the star in this movie, and his character has a lot of anxiety and is very nervous and reserved, and I found myself relating to that. He's also a flawed person and deals with his anxiety in sometimes negative, harmful ways, which I thought was interesting and gave him the necessary layers he needed. It's definitely one of my favorite Leonardo DiCaprio performances that I've seen. Meryl Streep is also going to be nominated, I'm sure, because she's Meryl Streep. This might actually be a case where her nomination is actually sort of earned. Her character was so accurate to reality, and I had a kind of similar hatred towards her that I had towards characters like Dolores Umbridge. In fact, a lot of characters in this movie had my blood boiling. This movie also had a ton of intercutting, and sometimes it gets very experimental in the way scenes are cut together. I found the filmmaking to be thrilling throughout, and it was really unique how this movie was made. This is an excellent movie, and I highly, highly recommend it. The only thing I didn't like was the second post-credit scene. It didn't match the rest of the movie for me, and it didn't make much sense, but the rest of the movie was amazing. That's just the second post-credit scene. Like, if that's the only part I didn't like, that's pretty impressive. Now, for the end of this video, I'm gonna cheat and talk about a TV series because this was my favorite thing to come out of 2021. Mike Flanagan is one of my favorite directors working today, and I think Midnight Mass is the best thing he has ever made. This is also the best limited series I've ever seen, period. This is an incredible show about religious fanaticism and religious cults. The show is about so much more than that, though. It asks so many beautiful philosophical questions about religion and different forms of belief, why we believe the things we believe, our idea of an afterlife, addiction. I could go on. As someone who grew up surrounded by religion and has always been fascinated by the topic, this show mesmerized me. Zach Gilford is great in this show as the atheist character, and he echoed a lot of my own personal worldviews. He's kind of the lead character, but I think the true lead character is Father Paul, played by Hamish Linklater. This character is incredible and goes through so many surprises. He's extremely layered, and the performance Hamish gives might be one of my favorite performances by an actor just in general. I don't think I'm exaggerating here. He literally gave me flashbacks into my own upbringing. Like, this was some deep shit. Samantha Sloyan is also great as a despicable character, very much echoing the Jehovah's Witness style, racist, bigot side of religion. There are so many great characters in this show. It's the best showcase of religion that I've ever seen on film, and I couldn't recommend it enough. In fact, it might actually be the best horror ever made since The Shining. And I don't know if I'm exaggerating there. Thanks for watching, everyone. I made a short film in 2021. Check it out by clicking the link in the description. I'm also working on a Christmas movie, and I have an Instagram and Facebook account for that project, so go on over and follow it. Also in the description. Thanks, everyone.
You know how much I sacrifice?